having a precedence argument over which wahine goes where.
Tangata whenua first.
Anyway, hey, welcome, and thank you for coming. A little bit worried whether Barb would get in, coming up from Wellington, and we looked at the weather. But anyway, she made it, and thank you very much. A number of the MPs, as you know, have been cosseted in Parliament this week with Scrutiny Week. So Barbara's been putting the Treasury and her opponent, the Minister of Finance, through her paces. So a pleasure to come here to a conflict-free zone, I would say.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anyway, look, we're here to talk about tapping investment for Māori and Pasifika. And as we heard before, both these women have had terrific experiences. Barbara is a former tax lawyer turned politician. She's been the revenue minister. She's been a range of ministers, and now she's punting to become the finance minister, which is a role you've yet to have. But also, June has been very active in investment. For those of you who don't know, she's been quite a pathfinder in looking at ways to bring the Māori asset base into being. And when Adrian Orr was at the Reserve Bank and got criticised for some particular programs he got involved with, one of those was looking at Māori capital and how to access that and how to leverage the asset base. And June has been at the Māori Queen's Summit over last weekend, and so she will be able to give us a bit of a sense of that. But both of you have really, one way or another, been involved in setting up funds this year. Why don't you walk us through what you want to do, and then June, you can give your insights into what the Queen wants to do. Perhaps. Yes, you can.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you, Fran, for the opportunity today. And yes, we managed to land and leave Wellington relatively smoothly, which I was quite surprised with. I heard the Sky Tower had a bit of a thunderstrike. So Labour, about maybe 2 months ago, we announced that we would take to the election a future fund. The New Zealand Future Fund is about backing Kiwi ideas and being able to provide the backing that it needs in regards to access to capital. So as many people in the room will know, New Zealand has low productivity. Historically, over the last couple of decades, it's because the structure of our economy is basically two things: primary commodities and a property market. So one of the issues that was identified as to why we have low productivity is access to capital, or shallow pools of capital. Both the Productivity Commission and the Reserve Bank identified that as one of the reasons, plus innovation and tech, etc., etc. So for Labour, the Future Fund will be set up via legislation. It'll be managed at arm's length to the government, very similar to how the New Zealand Super Fund is managed. So the guardians of the Future Fund will be required to, with a $200 million one-off capital injection, as well as the seeding of some commercial government assets, using the dividends to grow the fund, it'll be required to reinvest that back into the economy. So slightly different remit from the Super Fund. The Super Fund obviously maximise returns to help with future superannuation costs. We could have gone and basically just directed the Super Fund to actually direct more investment into New Zealand, because they have about 11 to 18%. However, we've decided to go with a separate fund, so not to disturb the long-term investment decisions that the Super Fund has. And also, this has a very different purpose. The purpose is to reinvest into the public good for New Zealand. So probably the most similar wealth fund, sovereign wealth fund, that I can sort of identify how we want this to work is ISIF, the Irish Strategic Investment Fund. Again, has the dual purpose of basically growing the economy in Ireland and reinvesting the funds from that sovereign wealth fund back into the Irish economy to create jobs, innovation and tech, for us around infrastructure, so it could be social infrastructure such as housing as well, and for us is the transition to energy. So that's what Labour is proposing to take to the next election, and announced a couple of weeks ago. Would love to talk to anybody here in the room who wants to have a chat around the investment framework, that piece of work. I'm having a lot of active conversations with both investors here in New Zealand and those like Kiwi Saver providers and the super fund eventually will have that discussion when we get into government.
June, just give us a little bit of your take on the fund that the Māori Queen announced.
Thanks. Kia ora koutou. Thank you, Fran. Just to note, if I may, I have to note that it's a congratulatory note on the idea of the future fund, but I do say you have a track record. So your government did seed the New Zealand Super Fund, and you also seeded the Venture Investment Fund. So it's just acknowledging that you do have a track record, and in actual fact, I was privileged enough to be founding board member of the Venture Investment Fund. But to get to the Queenie Fund, so I don't know if people are aware, the kingitanga is a movement that began in the 1850s, and it was a consequence of the concern by the tribes at the time of the colonisation pressures. So it was a way of bringing all the tribes together in order to protect sovereignty going forward. So if you roll the clock forward, it's 200 years almost, because that's about 1850, and we've been focusing our attention on 2040 on the basis that in 2040 we want to be better off than we are today, because we were better off in 1840 than we are today. So you know, it has this context, and so with a 200-year vision in mind, and this new queen, and you have to bear in mind she's 27 years old. Right, she's 27 years old, and she's got this bestowed privilege. You know, she might feel it's different because it's a heavy weight in order to follow on the kingitanga emphasis. So this was a call to action, and there were 250 people in attendance. 50 of these people were international guests, predominantly sovereign wealth funds with strong interest in Indigenous developments globally. It follows on from much work that the kingitanga has done in trade missions and going around the globe. I think, Fran, you've been on one of those trips. So it's a call to action. These people came a long way to meet with us, and there's a combination of people that were iwi Māori, because Māori entities, as well as banks, private sector. So a really amazing group of, and you know, I feel again honoured to be present in that. Great vibe, inspiring, a real sense of step up, move forward, look forward, don't look back, try to think about a future for ourselves. And I do say that when you think about a 27-year-old who's got a leadership in front of her of 50 odd years, it's pretty amazing to be in that moment in time. So that's a bit about the makeup of it, but it's very much around, it's capital, yes, because access to capital is what hold us back, is constraints around capital. Arguably, that's a lot of what people say anyway, but it's harder for Māori because it's collective assets, collective ownership, which is deemed to be inferior relatively because it's harder to work with. So the idea was to have kindred in the room that were prepared to work with those sorts of structures. But other than that, the other part of it really is the deal flow versus the capital. So there's interest from a capital point of view, and we've got to then develop our deal flow.
Yeah. Barbara, you were at the New Zealand Investment Summit earlier in the year, and you gave a presentation there, and also Ruka Moana from Kingitanga, she also spoke. And it was quite noticeable that pretty quickly after that, Brookfield Asset Management basically foreshadowed an investment in the Rukawa Super Hub structure down in the Waikato, and essentially over time at completion value expected to be something like $1 billion over about a 7-year period. I mean, you've been up also in the United States this year while you were on the speaker tour, and you may not have been necessarily talking to funds and asset managers as such. Just give us a little bit of a sense of how you read that, and would you also see, on assuming you became the government, that your fund would perhaps also take other investments from offshore or not?
Yeah. So ultimately, when we went to the investment summit earlier this year, it was really a good, I think from a New Zealand Inc. perspective, that the opposition was there, and I acknowledge the Prime Minister for his invitation and the fact that I had a few of our colleagues who were able to be there. What was really good about the summit is, even though we aren't in government, and we have quite specific, we sort of set out some of the areas where we wouldn't necessarily have some foreign investment in, for example, around schools and prisons and hospitals, etc. What was really good was talking to some of the investors that were there and developing different relationships with them, some that have continued now since April. And, having when we announced the Future Fund, it was just coincidental that evening I had a dinner with Tainui and with Ruku and with Rangimarie and with Tukurangi Morgan. So at that dinner, they saw this as an opportunity for their balance sheet and our balance sheet, or the Future Fund's balance sheet, to be able to partner together. Because ultimately, the conversations I've had with other iwi leaders since that announcement, it comes down to scale. They want to be able to, we have the same values around long-term investment, looking towards the future for future generations, being able to invest into infrastructure, for example, that benefits and enables productivity and jobs, especially, particularly in those regions. The opportunity for the Future Fund now to, be able, because it's a public good, being able to partner with Māori who want to be a strategic investment partner, not just a ticker box for consultation. They want to be a strategic investment partner. There was we could see there was a real alignment and sort of opportunities are opening up as a result of the ability for the Future Fund to use part of those assets to work with Māori. So the opportunity's there.
And it was certainly the perspective I had when I talked to Duncan Bonfield from the Sovereign Wealth Funds Association out of London, and they've got X trillion dollars associated with the funds there. There's about 30-odd funds affiliated. And also North American funds who were down. June, is it fair to say that there's been a significant shift towards investing in indigeneity, if you like, and Indigenous, Māori, Pasifika, not only there, but around the world? It seems almost, your friend, our friend, all of our friend, Party Tyson Nathan, basically said, guys, brown is hot, recognise it. But do you see that there is this sort of shift to, getting behind and growing off the base of probably the hard assets that actually are there? Yep.
Definitely, and that was the sentiment expressed by a number of the wealth funds representatives the other day. So in response to that, what we understand quite clearly is we need to aggregate and scale. Because we do travel the world, but actually on an individual iwi basis, we're a thumbnail in the overall scheme of things, right? The pimple on the butt, so to speak. So aggregation and scale is really important. And there are so if you just say iwi, there's 126 iwi. 88 iwi are actually part of the National Iwi Forum, which has been in existence for a decade. And this forum, in its wisdom, as a consequence or in response to the Māori access to capital challenges, set up Rauawa, which is what I lead the establishment on. And Rauawa is like a clearinghouse, a intermediary. So the aim of Rauawa is to act, on the demand side, supply side, and create those the interfaces and the super connecting. But really, what we have to do is aggregate and scale ourselves. So and we're already working on this. So it's started, and I guess the timing of them coming here fits well with the action coming off the Brookfields, because that's a $500 million investment. So that's real in the mind's eye of those that do come. But we've got to follow that through. And if I take sectors like energy as a good one, because that's how you can really see how the asset base can be pulled and then strengthened and then pursue capital that way. So the Rauawa entity is alive and well working for the iwi to aggregate and scale to meet the capital requirements. And a lot of the theming that came out at the hui was to do with, what comes first, the deal versus the capital, and you've got to kind of understand that sometimes you need to take a deal and then the rest, the capital will follow. So it's strengthening the platform in order that we can deal with the asymmetry that happens, because it's very difficult for investors to deal with 88 iwi, right? In fact, impossible, and they wouldn't do it. Who do I really talk to? So Rawa's role is to make that seamless and agnostic. I call it agnostic, so it's for all iwi, not just vested interest of some. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll just add to it. I mean, I've just come out of the annual review with Treasury, so it's 3 hours of actually really good discussion, some in-depth policy discussion. And it was quite interesting when I looked at the annual report for Treasury 24-25. They actually had the figures for foreign direct investment stock as a percentage of GDP here in New Zealand. And so year in June 2022, it was at 42.8%. Year in June 2025, it was 39.3%. It actually reduced over time, slightly over time. And I know that basically there is a lot of capital out there that wants to invest in New Zealand. I would like some of our own capital within New Zealand to invest in New Zealand. And I think one of the areas with the consultation I've had with businesses and investment funds over the last sort of 18 months being the finance spokesperson, one of the issues that they're saying to me is we want to, particularly with our New Zealand wealth funds, they want to invest in New Zealand. However, the way that the government structures the deal doesn't suit them. So I think you kind of need to sort of tip that jar over then. If rather than the government saying this is the deal that we're looking for, will you invest? And they say, well, no, because the scale, the aggregation, etc. What if we looked at it the other way round, which is basically, particularly when it's for Kiwi funds like KiwiSaver and the Super Fund, if we say to them, well, this is the infrastructure pipeline, which both parties have agreed to, because we've been working quite as bipartisan as we can in relation to that, what of that pipeline could you scale to suit you, and what sort of deal, what would be the type of deal that suits you, an alliance, a PPP, or just a straight basic deal contract. So I think there's an opportunity there to sort of turn the jar upside down. Rather than the government say, here's the deal for you, they say, well, actually, we want to stay in New Zealand, invest in New Zealand, that project, we think we could do it like this.
I love that, because, I mean, we are working closely on infrastructure particularly. So that, I mean, the key thing from a Māori iwi point of view is these are strategic assets and they belong in the country. So the best way for that to happen is that we invest in them and keep them here and not let offshore rents happen, right? So, I mean, that's the motivation from the work we're doing.
Do I take it from there that you are open, agnostic, or opposed to foreign investment? Come on, June.
Well, whatever works, honey.
That's okay.
Sorry.
That's all right. It's getting to the end of the day. So anyway, are we fit for purpose when it comes to foreign investment? Particularly, let's get back to US investment, because there's been remarkable interest, obviously, earlier in the year at the Prime Minister's summit, several North American sovereign wealth funds, and including, I think, at least one or two out of the US present at the weekend. Do you see, I mean, if it's not a total 100% foreign, but do you see opportunities for partnership to get that capital to actually leverage assets and grow them at scale?
Absolutely. I mean, these investors are reaching out, and they're also giving us guidance around how to reciprocate, how to engage back the other way. That certainly you don't have one event. You've got to follow through with another one, but also you've got to go and visit them, go and meet them on their ground and keep them informed and build that relationship, because that's the platform ultimately. I do think that it's a lot about impact investing. So, and that's very much, certainly the Kotahitanga Fund is about the difference it makes at that social investment and social impact level. So that's really the major, I think that's the global trend. It's how sustainable communities work. And even though there's geopolitical challenges, I think that's one kind of reason why I think that the genuineness of the interest in it and the impact that it can make in keeping the communities well developed and healthy and all well-being metrics alongside I think those are the things that these wealth funds look for, you know. So I think that's just reinforcing the trends that ESG bring about, responsible investing brings about, and so that's why there's, to a certain extent, that early capital and the ability for us to repay it at the right time, so to reinforce our sovereignty and reinforce our strategic assets belong in this country. And, you know, I'm reminded about people like Sam Stubbs, you know, he's constantly talking about those issues, but, you know, there's no amount of capital available to any of us to transition the assets we have to those environmental, you know, those assets that we need to be moving to. It's a huge job, and Māori iwi actually have a very large component in their asset portfolios of these assets that need to transition. And that was the nature of the settlement at the time. So we've got a lot to do, and not a lot of money to do it, and there's no amount of money in the world to do it right now. So it's how we build ourselves, and we are not necessarily the most easiest to deal with, the most easy to invest in.
Yeah.
If you thought Pākehā politics was hard, look at Māori and actually Pacific politics as well. And I've been having this conversation both with some actual MPs across the floor and within my own team and with some private sector people. If the world is whatever's happening in the world and all the geopolitical tensions, both in Europe and other things, I mean, I don't need to say it here, what's our plan B for our region? You know, the region as in Australia and the Pacific, you know, the CTPP, obviously there are countries wanting to join us in that particular space. And when I think about when I was at the World Bank in July this year on that US tour, I spent a day with them and the IMF. You know, their focus on the Pacific, I was, myself as a Pacific person, and obviously being a bit more tuned into Pacific politics in our region, I was a little bit surprised how I felt like their analysis was slightly behind. And so really for New Zealand, you know, we've always had a presence in the Pacific. The US has had a presence in the Pacific since the World War, you know, having annexed American Samoa after Germany basically gave up America Samoa to America, and then Western Samoa to New Zealand. So they've had a long presence in the region. But when I talk to different investors, etc., around the Pacific, I'm like, well, what's our plan here? How do we, if everyone else is in a handcart, what are we doing to strengthen our relationships? And what is both, you know, Fiji's our 6th largest trading partner. We've got MFAT, who've had a presence in the Pacific for a while. The Pacific Island Investment Forum, which was set up maybe about 10 years ago. MFAT has been trying to help them build their capability. The New Zealand Super Fund hosted their last conference here in 2022. I think we've got an opportunity within our region alone to come up with that plan that we can do, so that if everything else is happening across the world, well, where are our closest economic partners? It is the Pacific and it is Australia. So I think there's some really good opportunities there, because there's some gaps that I identified when I was talking to the World Bank.
Network in the US still? You would want to see the US back in?
Well, they're there.
Yeah.
You know, they've been
Leverage
there
it.
since they've been there since 1914. Or, you know, as a presence in there. And you know, there's a million American Samoans. You know, they're in Hawaii as well. So I think it's just those relationships will always be there. So will the Chinese, and I'll be really frank about that. The Chinese also have a strong ties to the Pacific, because when they were sent over as indentured labourers to a lot of the Pacific countries to work the copper fields. So there is actually familial relationships with Chinese. But it's more just as a region, what is our plan to ensure that we have security, stability, and the ability to help our Pacific partners also, particularly through the investment forum, to leverage off that. If it's not just our domestic balance sheet, you know, how are we working with other countries in our region?
Just a closing comment from you both. Well, June.
I think that New Zealand needs Māori to succeed in our effort to accelerate development, Māori development. You need us to succeed. We're running short on our per capita contribution relative to you, and the aim is for us to be at par, at least. And all of what we're trying to do is get to that point, because we're branded a little bit with begging bowl politics, you know, dependency on government funding, and we're trying to rid ourselves of that dependency and forge a future which we can lead, and it's led by us for us and for the better of all of us. So mine is wish us luck.
And I'm biased because June knows me and Fran knows I've got 8 children who whakapapa to Ngāpuhi, so right up the top of the North Island. So for me, I've always had the perspective, and I've also advised from a legal perspective, trusts, ahu whenua trusts, and the difficulties with Te Ture Whenua Māori Act, which holds back some of that unlocking of Māori potential, particularly at a hapu level. So for me, the one thing that makes us different in the rest of the world is te ao Māori. That is our superpower. Cannot stress that enough. Both when people want to come here to New Zealand, they want to see te ao Māori. They want to see what makes us special. I absolutely acknowledge June and Hikuini for all the work that they're doing to row their own waka. I think the important thing for us as the Labour Party, it's in our constitution, the way that we honour te tiriti, is to make sure that we don't step in your way, and that if there's opportunities to actually be strategic investment partners together, that we actively hunt those opportunities as well when we get into government next year.
Yeah.
Kia ora.
Kia ora. Hey, thank you both. I thought it was very important because what happened last weekend was actually quite signal. This was, a statement by this 27-year-old reigning monarch that empowerment was important, that standing on feet, that embracing the world, and not necessarily just the Indo-Pacific, but more broadly, going global and seeking investment, seeking linkages, having some 50-odd global funds down to New Zealand. Extraordinary, really. So I'd like to applaud you particularly, June, for being involved in it, and also, the vision you show, Barbara. So thank you.